building and don't come back into our fire officials have instructed everyone to do so. I'd like to ask everyone to please rise. We'll pledge allegiance to the American flag. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, we have a fairly straightforward meeting tonight. First part is administrative board work, where we get our business done. Approval of business minutes, regional impact determinations, and discussion with town staff. We have, after that, will be conceptual plan presentation, and after that, we will have a work session dealing with our application process and procedure and everything. If anyone had a chance to see or attend the virtual planning conference Saturday, they touched on this as more of the statutory details, but Kelly will go a little more in-depth on what we do here. But it's a fairly straightforward process if you go by the statutes, which we do. Also, the town council appointed Tony DiFrancesco as an alternate, and Tony can't make it tonight. And Jason, I guess, is not going to be here tonight, but we have a full board. We have nine voting members present. We have a quorum, and we can proceed. So first thing we will do is approval of minutes. I have minutes of April 5th and April 12th. I'll take those separately for motions. If anyone wants to abstain or object, that will allow them to do so.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to make a motion to accept the minutes of the April 5th meeting.
Second.
I have a motion by Al, a second by Jake. Any discussion on those minutes? Seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, say nay. Abstentions?
Abstain.
Jeff abstains. Chair votes affirmative, and motion carries. Minutes of April 5th are approved.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to make a motion to approve the minutes of April 12th, 2023.
Motion by Al, second by Jake. The board have any discussion on the April 12th minutes? Seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, say nay. Abstentions? And chair votes affirmative. Motion carries. Minutes of April 12th are approved. Regional impact determinations, do we have anything, Kelly?
None this evening.
Okay. We'll move right along. Discussions with town staff. I know we have a lot line merger, or a lot merger.
Correct. You have a lot merger application in front of you, Mr. Chair, that requires your signature, and that is for 14 Constance Drive. It's very
Tax
simple.
map
merge of
6,
two
lot
parcels.
5912, and map 6, lot 59-12A are being combined.
Correct.
That's statutorily, that's a merger. So it requires the chair to sign, and I need a motion to, the chair to sign the,
So move, Mr. Chairman.
Second.
okay, motion by Al, second by Jake. Any discussion by the board? Seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 All those opposed, say nay. Abstentions, and I will sign these, because I can find the place where to, yep, I found it. I will sign those. Anything, John?
Nope, nothing this evening.
Okay, Kelly, anything from staff?
I will take up the second half of this meeting, so.
Okay, you'll have your piece there. Anything from the board?
Quick question on continuances, if I could.
Yes.
I know we had, I think it was 2 meetings ago now, I believe there was 3 plans that had requested to be seen, or requested to continue, I think more of a courtesy than anything because of the length of the meeting. I guess I didn't realize it until we got here, well, until the agenda came out, that they weren't on this schedule, they're on next week's schedule. Is there any reason in particular, or?
Continued plans are heard the second Wednesday of every month. It's in our rules of procedure. so.
Okay. Just curious, because I guess they
That's
were
what- that's
technically
what-
continued but never seen, if you will, like, we didn't really,
Yeah,
See
you
'em,
go through the rules
you
of
know.
procedure, Jake.
Yeah.
It's in there,
yeah,
on how we structure our meetings and everything.
yeah.
So I think if you want a change of them, you can send in a writing and reason why to Kelly, and we'll discuss it as, it takes two sessions of discussing
Yeah.
and voting
Yeah.
for a changing of the rules of procedure.
Is that something that would need to be changed if we wanted to change it, or is it, you know, 'cause
It
like I
is
said,
ultimately at the board's discretion if they want to pick a date certain to continue to. The
Okay.
board can go outside its own rules if that is the consensus of the board.
okay,
But it
We were-
is,
if
it
we
is
were-
in our regulations as well to have new applications on the first meeting of the month and continued applications on the second.
yeah, okay,
And we don't want to tie our hands over either, Jake, because sometimes if somebody else comes in with a new plan,
yep,
you know, they want to be, that's
Yeah,
typically
yeah.
the schedule. So
Yeah.
it's hard for us to say, well, come the first meeting, and then we have too many, and then we kick out the new guy.
yeah, yeah,
That pushes him out even further.
yeah, because I think next week's meeting's probably gonna be a long one, huh?
That all depends.
Quite a bit on the agenda, I
Yeah.
would think.
We get, there are actually 4 continued plans.
Yes. So,
So
all right,
bring the bedroll, or, I think if the plans are well presented, well done, they go right through. If there's problems, that what takes the time.
yeah, so, just, I guess, in my head, was just something to think about next time is, you know, we didn't really see them. I know they were continued, but we didn't really see them, so.
Yeah, that's
I
the
would still
most I think
consider it
I can recall, but
Okay.
the system has worked quite flawlessly with very few complaints from applicants and engineers, so.
Sure.
Okay, the other thing is, Saturday was the planning conference, which was very good. They're gonna have information out shortly, and there'll be YouTube of the whole thing, which I will send out to the board when I do get it from the Office of State Planning. And it was a very, very handy thing, and I'll send out the slides for it also. And then as of Thursday in 2 weeks, there'll be a Office of Planning and Development noontime webinar dealing with some planning issues. So those are very, very handy. They're usually about an hour. It's all virtual. So you can sit there and, in front of your computer and watch the whole thing. You have the opportunity to ask questions. I know from the planning conference, there was probably another hour of questions and answers, and that was a very informative part, so. So moving along, conceptual plans, we have a conceptual review and a non-binding discussion of a proposed building addition, garage bays and 2 parking lot expansion areas in a commercial 2 C2 zoning district. 1 Action Boulevard, tax map 10, lot 51, Wyndham Realty Incorporated is the owner and the applicant, and conceptual discussion is just that. There are no decisions made, and it's designed for an exchange of ideas between the applicant and the board. So you just need to identify yourselves for our records, and you have the floor.
Good evening, board members. My name is Matthew Ruthier. I'm with TF Moran, representing the applicant. To my right is Steve DeLuca, who runs the operations for Auto Auction New England. It was recommended to us that we come before you folks to kind of explain what the intent of this plan is. Get your input. We feel it's beneficial as well as we proceed forward with this. The majority of the proposal is pretty much a last effort at, maximizing what's necessary for this business as it is currently. The proposal consists of some building expansions, roughly, I think it's 7,560 square feet to the main building that is there now, with an additional 2,944 square feet for the 7-bay structure located just to the north of the main building. Additionally, we're looking to expand storage lot capacity. All the areas as highlighted on the plan are actually proposed for storage of vehicles. Currently, the area to the north between the bank and the office/mall currently houses some larger vehicles. It does have currently a fence around it. That fence, from my understanding, is temporary. So the intent would be to make that a permanent spot with pavement that could be maintained. In addition, in the center of the site, the intent would be to pave an area that is currently grass in order to create some additional fenced-in secure storage. And the expansion of the storage lot to the south along the wetlands, the intent of that, again, would be for storage for vehicles. We would be replacing the above-ground ponds with underground systems in order to replace the capacity of what's there now. Again, we've gone through pretty much all the permitting history that's available on this piece. I have done calculations on parking after the fact to make sure we meet or comply with that. For all uses, we exceed parking requirements for all uses on the site, which include the bank, the office/strip mall, and the auto auction itself. The auto auction typically employs most of its people on Thursday during the auction day. Those people currently park partially on-site near the office/strip mall, and the remainder park off-site at the Park and Ride. That has been occurring for quite some time with no issues from the Park and Ride folks. During the auction, they do employ additional employees to handle movement of cars and whatnot due to the pace of the auctions. So with that, I will gladly look for the boards for any input or concerns that we may address as we proceed with this.
Okay, I'm going to start with staff. We'll get staff input, and then we'll go to the board, and we'll get input from the board. John?
Again, Matt, Bill, and Steve have met a couple of times with Kelly. I've provided Matt some technical comments as they relate to just parking space sizes and making sure that the future parking or the future uses of the strip mall are addressed now. That way, again, there's not a need for them to continue coming back. If we can look at what the overall parking capacity is about that building, that way it's addressed once and for all. And it was a few years back, they had come in and there was some finagling we had to do, basically. So right now, I have nothing else to add. As Matt has indicated, they're looking to do some underground storage out there. Again, I'm not a big fan, but again, it's something that they'll have to put on their O&M to maintain it and deal with it.
Yeah. This will be a site plan amendment, correct?
Correct.
Okay. Ellie?
That's correct. So this will require a site plan amendment, so it will be the standard process, if you will, of doing a landscape plan. The parking, as John mentioned, is kind of the bigger item, but it appears as though that's been addressed for the most part. We'll obviously have to look at it once a formal submission is received. Outside of that, just making sure all the uses, as, you know, making sure they work together on the site. But overall, we've had good preliminary discussions with the applicant, and we'll look to the board for any additional input.
Okay. I'll start with Ann.
I just have a question for staff.
Yes.
I noticed there's a lot of wetlands around the area. Is there any issues you saw, or does everything fit within the regulations?
As they've indicated it, and they're doing any of the work that they're proposing right now is outside the 50-foot buffer.
Nothing is?
Everything is
Okay.
outside of that buffer.
Thank you.
Yep.
I have no questions.
Is it Gianni?
Does this comply with the lot coverage ratio for the impervious soils?
We have done calculations on that. We're required 33%, and we've provided 42% based on the lot. The lot overall size is 32.45 acres.
Oh, okay. Okay, I'm all set.
All set? Jeff?
I have no comments.
Okay. Lynn?
If staff is comfortable with the underground stormwater storage, then I am. That would be my only question.
Okay. Al?
Just one question. Do you routinely have any hazardous materials on site?
No.
No? Okay, that's all I had.
Ted?
No real questions, just looking forward to expanding business.
Roger?
I don't see a question here. Everything looks, at this point, good.
Bruce?
No questions, looks good.
Okay. And Jake?
I'm good. I'm good, Mr. Chair. Making a bigger parking lot bigger. Makes sense.
Business expands, so
Exactly.
I think as long as it meets, all of our criteria, regulations. I know this, I think it's gone through several expansions that go back quite a ways. And I think the concerns there was the buffering from the, 93. It's fairly well set back, so anyone on 102 doesn't even know it's there unless they're specifically going there. And I think they'll probably end up with the details of, drainage and so forth.
Yes, I believe previously there were requirements for plantings in the DOT right away, if I'm correct. I think those plantings have since gone kaput,
There
and
used to be a nice knoll there, with trees on top of it, but then in the 93 expansion, just.
Correct.
That's gone.
the only other issue that John had brought up to me, which I looked at, was concern about the building location in relation to the sewer easement and the foundation of where that's going to be built on the expansion. I've looked at that, and it appears that the angle of repose from the footing should be below the pipe. So we shouldn't have any impact to the sewer easement as it stands now. And I did do some research on the actual easement language, and the easement language is so old that there are actually no restrictions.
I believe it.
So I just wanted to bring that up to the board.
The
so-
old days.
Yeah.
Yeah, it looks quite straightforward to me. I think it's, what we do for, the buffering effect and everything, and that there's, sufficient parking spaces, still meeting our requirements. And the building, the bay expansion going to be same design, is already what's there. So that won't look any different. Same color.
Yeah, the only issue as far as parking that's kind of in question is, the normal space for, a parking lot is 9 by 20. Well, these are obviously car storage spaces. It's
little
not
different.
it's not quite the same. The intent is to be able to double stack, end to end as much as
Squeeze 'em.
possible. And obviously, this has been, it's been in front of the fire department, and there really hasn't been any concern, I don't think, in the past, if I'm correct.
Yeah.
So
This-
those spaces will not typically be, 9 to 20, 9 by 20, but obviously the parking for the public, which is to the right side or the east side of the building, is all in conformance with
That's,
the requirements.
the public doesn't mingle in that area at all or anything. They just, where there's common parking for customers.
Correct.
Okay. Just work with staff, very good. And, sort through the details, and I think it's good. It's good, it's expanding, it's a good sign, so.
Thank
Any questions of us?
I don't believe so.
Okay, yeah, work with staff, and also any abutters also, make sure they know what's going on, so that when the construction starts, we don't get deluged with calls, or I think it's a fairly good area. You got the dairy, lagoons and the sewer plant there, so quiet neighbor.
Yeah, I don't think there's too much to the east side as well.
Okay,
Thank you.
you're welcome. I wish they were all like this. Okay. Next, Kelly is on, and she'll have a presentation, and then we'll entertain discussion and questions and answers.
All right, so, thank you, Mr. Chair. So what I'd like to do is, this is the work session that we've been discussing, which I'll start off by going over the statutory requirements in terms of our review process, get into the specifics about Londonderry's design review and formal review process, as well as talk about basically what happens at the planning board meeting itself in terms of completeness waivers, and then the staff recommendation. So I'd like to go through that, and I'm happy to take questions as we go, or we can wait to the end. I'll leave that up to the board. So just as a reminder, design review, preliminary and conceptual discussions are governed by state statute 67642A. These are non-binding reviews and discussions. And this is also what we cite in our own regulations in how we handle our review process as well. Formal applications, again, RSA 67441. The formal application process, like I say, is governed by statute as well as through our regulations. And this is just the general overview of how the formal application works. So, we're talking about a complete application, which means sufficient information that allows the board to proceed with a decision. Regulations that specify what completed application is. A checklist is something that can be used as reference for completeness. Fees associated with the application, studies, and so on. So that's the general overview of the statutory requirements.
Which are all reflected in our regulations.
Correct.
Yep.
So when we get into our process specifically, like I say, the starting point is with the statutory requirements. And as I said earlier, design review is a non-binding and optional process, but we do highly encourage and recommend that applicants go through this process. So what is that process? That process entails a design review application that's submitted, that's inclusive of items that are listed specifically in our regulations. So again, that's an application, a checklist, appropriate traffic studies, analyses, environmental studies, anything that's applicable in that regard to the project. Once we receive that design review application and associated items, we review it to make sure it has all of those set items, and then we send it out to third-party review so that they can do a cost estimate of what that review will be. Once we get that estimate back, it's provided initially to the planning department, so me for the time being, and I take a look at it just to make sure there's nothing that is of question or that I might have questions about as far as the total cost. And then I forward that on to the applicant to establish what we call an escrow account. And that escrow account is essentially the fund that's used to pay the third-party reviewer to do all the necessary reviews throughout the entirety of the project. The applicant, like I say, provides that fee for the review services. Once we get that fee, that is when the 30-day review period begins. So as you can probably imagine, that period of time that I just kind of discussed can take a week, it can take 2 weeks, but we can't start the 30-day review until we have the funds in place. I think that's the key thing to remember. And we do state that to the applicant when we establish that initial fee. And the reasoning for that is because if we don't have the funds in place, it becomes a liability for the town. Meaning if the applicant hasn't provided us the funds to start that review, and then we proceed with the review, and they don't ever provide us funds, the town is liable for those fees. So I know it sounds, kind of, why am I getting into the weeds of this? But what we hear a lot is things like, oh, I submitted my application last Thursday, so the 30-day review period should have started. Well, no, it starts once we get the funds. So I want to make sure the board understands that and kind of the why behind it. So get the fee, we start the 30-day review. During that 30-day review period, the application is sent out to the design review committee. The design review committee is established in our regulations, and it consists of the Heritage Commission, the Conservation Commission, the Zoning Board, and all municipal departments, as well as, obviously, our third-party reviewer. So there's a 30-day time frame of which all of those parties review the application. Comments are then provided to the planning department. They're compiled along with the third-party comments. And then John and I will sit down and go through them and then send those to the applicant. When we compile those comments and send them to the applicant, again, keeping in mind this process isn't required, it's highly encouraged and recommended. So when we compile those comments and send them to the applicant, we encourage them to schedule a meeting with us to go over those comments. Most of the time, we have that meeting with the applicant. And I think it's important to note that when we have that sit-down meeting with the applicant to go over those comments, it's productive and it leads to a more successful and streamlined process. So that's kind of the gist of design review.
I have a question.
Yeah,
Questions?
So what component of that, what you just reviewed with us, happens in the 30 days? Everything except for the sit down with the applicant, or?
No. So the 30 days is simply to have all of the municipal departments and third party conduct their review, send their comments to the planning department, compile them all within 30 days, and then send them to the applicant.
Within the 30 days, or?
No later than the 30 days is the goal.
Okay.
So basically, the ball's in our court, John.
Yeah. 30 days, balls in our court.
So the applicant should have a letter from you folks after you review everything within 30 days.
Correct.
Correct.
What happens if it doesn't happen?
They can choose to proceed without the comments. They can,
I don't think anybody would want to proceed without it. It's just, okay, and then that recommended meeting that comes afterwards is some time frame after the 30 days.
correct. And so once we send those comments out, then the ball's in their court, if you will, meaning they can take as much time as they need or don't need to look at the comments before they meet with us. We encourage them to look through them a little bit before they meet with us so that they can come to that meeting with questions and,
Yeah,
have
makes
some
sense.
productive discussion at the meeting, but
Some comments are pretty straightforward, but some of them they don't quite get, so they take a guess at what they're doing, what the comment means. I've been doing this long enough that I know I know how the consultant thinks, our third party thinks, and I know the regulations. So sometimes they'll start going down the road the wrong way. And I say, well, why did you do that? And then what ends up happening is that they're they're spending the applicant's money, in my opinion, and they'll blame it on us. The other thing that we need to realize, though, too, is that they're not the third-party comment, they're not the third-party consultants' comments, they're the town's comments. They are reviewing our regulations versus the plan, and they're seeing how the plan is meeting our regulation. So and then Kelly and I look at those third-party consultant comments, and there's some that we tell them, no, lose the comment. Plain and simple.
Yeah. So if it goes over the 30-day period, they can choose to proceed without, so like your option goes away and then they can move on beyond that. But it's probably not,
Would not be recommended, Your Honor, but I think, again, yeah, maybe rarely will it happen. You know, if somebody's on vacation or something like that, but we do our darndest to,
yeah.
at least personally, I do my darndest to make sure I look at those comments and get back to our third-party consultant.
Yeah.
I mean, there's no denying that it is not 100% of the time that we're within that 30 days. You know, like John said, things happen that are not even in our control sometimes. But we are, I would say, very good at staying on that 30-day mark. So,
All right, thank you.
Okay, Jeff, and I'll do Lynn.
Yeah, typically, have you seen a lag between when the application has been submitted and the escrow fee's been paid? Because you made a comment about, the applicants, thinking that the clock starts when the application is submitted, but it really starts at the escrow. But is there like a lag between frequently, or does it come in at the same time?
occasionally there's a lag. Occasionally we have applicants who maybe have some questions about the total fee. So we'll of course take the time to explain it, and the estimate provides a full breakdown of what exactly they're paying for. But most of the time, it's within a week's time that the estimate is received and provided, and then we get the check.
One thing I'd like to stress, though, too, is that, another thing that really impacts the escrow fee that's set up is the quality of the work. When I started engineering 37 years ago, I was a peon engineer, and I did the work, and I gave it to the chief engineer who reviewed it. He went in and he redlined it. I'll be dead honest with you all, I never thought I'd be an engineer, but when we sat down, I'm like, holy, can I really do this? Seriously, they don't do that nowadays. I swear to God. And if you talk to other engineers and, it's a computer game and the kid doesn't know what he's doing. So if they just give it to a greenhorn, the greenhorn will try it. And again, they're not really producing, addressing the comment, but yet they'll blame us by saying, so we're spending the escrow money because we're doing the QA for them, right? There's the QC I'm the QC, I'm designing it, and the QA is the chief guy that's gonna put the stamp to it.
Is the cost in the escrow kind of different for each applicant, or is it roughly the same? What's
So,
what dictates the cost?
Chime in if I'm wrong, but it's based on kind of small, medium, and large, if you will, project size.
Okay.
And there's kind of a general starting point for each of those. Of course, there's a significant difference between, the Wood Partners project and a lot line adjustment or something.
A 6-lot subdivision versus a, 6 or 4-phase subdivision that's gonna
That makes
last,
sense.
yeah.
That makes sense. Yeah,
And
so
I
it's
should-
based on sizing, kind of
Correct.
t-shirt sizing of the project.
Correct. It's based on sizing, and then some of it is based on the experience of the engineer reviewing projects, meaning they have a general understanding about how much time they're going to need to review it. And again, that's also part of that is also based on the quality of the submission. I should say too that included in that that estimate of services is the estimate of total number of reviews, meaning, and that's from start to finish. So design review through planning board approval is what the estimate aims to do, so that we're not having to go back and ask for more money. And that speaks to kind of the timeline as well.
And internally, you all have a process of like, how, it's all documented how the escrow fees are, kind of asked for the applicant and stuff like that, so it's all.
Yep, there's a formal letter that goes out. I have to sign off on it. There's all the corresponding financial forms that the finance department handles. It's all pretty formalized.
And sometimes there might be a delay too. So again, we'll go through the first round of design reviews, and then there's a delay before we see another resubmission. So again, I always use the analogy that, we don't know what's happening on that side too. Did the guy run out of money? Is he in a piss and match with his engineer? Who knows, so.
All right, thank you.
What's that?
So I think you've answered or a couple of my questions, but the cost estimate covers both the design review process as well as the formal application process?
Correct.
Okay.
I think sometimes, don't you include the legal as well?
Correct.
sometimes,
For
depending on
example, if we know there's going to be a significant amount of easements or legal documents, that will be included in the review as well.
Okay. And the 30-day review period, you mentioned some of the people or the organizations that get involved in the review, a couple being the Heritage Commission and the Zoning Board, ZBA. So being volunteer organizations, are they held to the same standard of turnaround time that like the engineering department would be?
So most of the time, that 30-day period has the meetings scheduled within it, meaning there are Conservation Commission meetings and Heritage meetings that take place all within that 30 days. And so we schedule the applicants accordingly.
Yep.
And the comments that those commissions provide are given immediately after the meeting to staff.
So the commission, during the course of its business, using the Conservation Commission as an example, during the course of their business, their meeting, the minutes of that meeting would be their response? or
We
the
actually have
summary?
a formal sheet, a DRC sheet that they fill out. It's sent to the planning department and included in the file, if you will.
Okay, and I would assume like the fire department, police department, they would have a delegate if the primary point of contact is out on vacation or something like that. They would have somebody else available to fill in.
Correct, yeah, as far as I know.
Okay, great, thank you.
The only committee that you mentioned though, Lynn, just for clarification, is the ZBA, right? Again, ZBA kind of runs on its own course. So again, some of those initial meetings that Kelly and I may have with an applicant or their engineer, that's not permitted in that zone. So you need to get a variance, or you need a special exception. So that kind of goes on its own course. And again, they need to meet those statutory filings for ZBA and whatnot.
But I would assume during the design review that would come up, right, as an
Absolutely.
action item that has to be accomplished before
Right.
they go into the formal
And-
review, or it would be dependent on the formal review getting approved.
Yep.
Absolutely. And most of the time, John or I are contacted in advance of any application submission, and we have a preliminary meeting where we talk about exactly what I'm talking about to you all. Here's the process, here's what we see might happen, here's what we see you might need for relief. And there's no formal plan or anything. It's usually just a discussion with property owners or engineers or both, so that we can kind of guide them in the right direction. Most of the time that happens. We occasionally get a submission that we didn't know about, but for the most part, we have that preliminary meeting.
And I'm sure there have been disagreements between your decisions and what the developer wants to do. How are those resolved during the design review
We're gonna go
process?
downstairs to the judge and jury. That's how I put it.
Oh, no.
Because again,
Well,
and that's
yeah.
why you see our position is we're enforcing the regulation.
And I think we're very clear with them about the fact that staff is making recommendations. Because sometimes we'll get the question, well, what do you think the board will do? What do you think, how can I get this approved? And it's, well, here's what we recommend, here's our regulations, but ultimately, the planning board is the jurisdictional body that's going to vote on that. And I'll get into that later about kind of the tools that you guys have to be able to make decisions. But yeah, we're very clear about, if you disagree, you have every right to go to the jurisdictional body to get a decision.
Great, thank you.
And they know
Yep.
from,
Yep.
yeah. We don't say, well, maybe we'll bend. No, you're gonna know right now that what I'm gonna say downstairs.
Right.
So,
Yeah, where there was, have a little bit of leeway, because a lot of the regulations rely upon reasonableness. And, you know, that's what's reasonable for a reasonable person. It's in case law, so.
Mr. Chair?
Yes, Ted?
How often are developers not wanting or going to the recommended meeting, like a percentage-wise?
which meeting are you talking about?
The recommended meeting to review,
To review the comments.
yeah.
It's few.
Yeah,
It's,
some of them, Ted, my thinking is that they're behind schedule. So it's like, just get it in. I need approval. Okay.
Right.
I agree.
But then they may be submitting and not making corrections potentially.
Right, and like I said, right, they gave it to the Greenhorn. The Greenhorn didn't understand what the comment was, and he's going down that road. It's like, you didn't even, you know, that's not what the comment said, and you redesigned everything?
And what percentage of the time are we using up 100% of the escrow funds? Or I guess the other way would be, what's the percentage that's being returned back to developers?
It's rare that we have a large sum returned,
Okay,
meaning the estimate is pretty accurate,
could be like within a few $100s if anything.
even less than that.
Oh, okay,
Yeah.
good to know.
And again, it depends on the quality of the work.
True, yep.
Yep.
And what happens if we use up all of the escrow? Do we need to go back to the developer and ask for
We
more?
do. Yep, so if that so we internally, I track the escrow fund for all the projects. The third-party reviewer also has their own tracking, and whenever we see that get low, we'll have a discussion about, okay, what's the anticipation of reviews that we have left? And we'll get a second estimate of services for any remaining items, and we'll inform the applicant that we anticipate X amount of funds needed to complete the remainder of this review.
Do you guys know over the past 10, 15 years, how many times we've gone over the escrow?
Not off the top of my head, but I'm sure we have.
Okay.
We have, I mean, recently, we've had two projects that have gone over. Well, that have gotten to a point where we have said we need additional funds.
I
Thank you.
believe the consultant also assumes two rounds of design review, Kelly?
Correct.
So
yeah.
again, yeah, so that's typically what they do, is they'll assume 2 rounds of design review, and then the final review for plan signature. But again, if they're using the town and the consultant as their quality assurance,
Right. That could be more costly than the road engineer,
you got it.
potentially.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think from our experience here, we can tell good engineering from not so good engineering.
This is
Goes
true.
behind it. so
Very much
it's,
so.
That's very obvious.
Who does their homework, who doesn't do their homework, you know?
Mr. Chair. How does the town choose who the third-party assessment is?
Quality-based selection,
Quality-based selection.
yeah, for our third-party consultant. That's how
Yeah.
we've determined it.
So are you asking which we send to, or are you asking how did we pick the two options that we have?
How do we pick the two options that we have?
That
Quality-based selection.
Whose
Quality-based,
quality? Our quality or their quality?
our quality. So again, we're asking, and that's kind of a typical engineering term, Bruce. So again, when you're designing, if you're designing a roadway, for instance, you're gonna do it by quality-based selection. You put out an RFP, you want consultants that do this type of work. We're gonna be designing a mile of a 4-lane road, Pettingill Road, want quality-based selection. You give us your information as far as your consultant, your firm's ability to perform such a task. What have you done? Who are the people on your team? What is your experience with traffic what is your experience with traffic lights? They come in, and so then we can shortlist the consultants that do that. We typically, with what we're doing here, we don't want somebody that does land development to be kind of, it's the wrong guy to be taking a look at this stuff. So the consultants that we use, they don't do land development type work. So they give us their quals, we shortlist them, we interview them, then we ask them, okay, then we ask them for their price. So
So,
it's quality-based selection, not the bottom dollar.
right, so it's essentially an RFP process where we've established a criteria, if you will, that we're looking to be met by a consultant. And through that process, there's applications that are, I mean, we've done this, we have established consultants already, but to get to where we are today, that was the process. So we received a number of potential consultants, and that went through an interview process, as John just highlighted, and certain consultants were chosen through that.
And how many consultants do we have on our call list?
We have two currently.
And how often do we review? Or how often do we RFP for third-party reviewers?
As long as we're happy with them, it's like going to a doctor, Bruce. You go to a different doctor every time you get an ailment. They're professionals.
There is no time limit. It's based on the satisfaction of work. So if there's a question or direction that we get from someone above us, or if we foresee any issues, we can certainly look into going through that process again.
And how do these consulting firms get graded?
How do they get, I'll provide you the background for quality-based selection next time I see you.
Okay.
How's that?
So I guess how I would rephrase my question is, how often are they right?
Right in terms of what?
Their assessment of a project, what the amount of an escrow is going to be, how often are they accurate?
Pretty accurate, again.
Yeah,
you know,
I haven't-
if we're- Yeah,
In my experience so far, I haven't seen any, I guess, inaccuracies, if you will. As John said, the consultant is doing a review based on our regulations. And so their review that they provide to us should reference our regulations. That is why John and I go through it, and we review each item and say, yep, keep this, nope, take that out.
and some of the things, Bruce, that I refer to, maybe take it out, I can deal with it during the construction. Those might be some of the stuff that I can deal with in the end. You follow me? As far as, them being right on with the regulations are the regulations. It's pretty
Right.
black and white. The escrow, again, I always go back to who's doing the work. And are they using the consultant as the QA, or are they doing it themselves? Firms, I could name the firms, but obviously I'm not going to.
Could the applicant potentially end up with the same firm on their side as we use on our side?
No. Like I said, the quality-based selection, they're not permitted to do development work.
For that reason.
You know.
Okay, so in addition to accuracy, do you look at consistency?
Yep. Yes, we do.
Yes.
Yeah, that's just as important.
Yep.
And how long has the two firms that we're using been our go-to firms?
Years, yeah. One of them's been here ever since I've been here.
At least 20.
Sometimes they know the regulations better than I do. So. Yeah, and the other one's probably 10.
So one, I believe, is probably 10,
Yep.
and the other is 20.
Yep.
And so these firms are essentially making money off of the applicant, not the town,
Correct.
right?
Yeah, it's
Because
the
we tell them, this is what it's gonna cost based upon the firm that we're using, and you pay them, essentially.
Correct. Yep. And again, so if you were to hire me, Bruce, to do the work, and then I'm not doing the work for you, then I always hear, well, the review fee is higher than what I'm paying my engineer. Well, yeah, because again, your engineer isn't doing a good job. So again, the QA is being done by them, so yeah, that's what happens. I can't deny it, and that's, realistically, I think that's what's happening. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it's interesting, certainly, but,
Yeah.
I guess it's interesting.
That's why a lot of times, again, bring the owner, bring the applicant in, so that he can hear why did you do it that way? Why did you already answer the question if you didn't understand the question?
Well, I think that's a good point. So I mean, at least since I've started, and I'm sure it was happening prior to, but I have at least tried to make additional efforts to make sure that the client, if you will, the applicant, not just the engineer, is getting all of these comments as well, so that they understand the conversations that are taking place between the town and their engineer that they're paying. So everyone's on the same page when we talk about what's missing, what's not, and get into those conversations.
Does the applicant's engineer get to talk to the engineering firm that we contract with?
No.
Not
Typically not.
directly, but when we have the design review follow-up meeting where we review the comments, typically, the third-party engineer is present.
It's part of the quality-based item, Bruce.
And then for the department reviews, what would be some examples of comments that you get from department heads or town departments for applicants?
So for example, the fire department will comment on any hydrant locations that might be required and any NFPA regulations that may apply to the project.
Turning radiuses for your ladder truck. Road widths.
Conservation Commission will comment on, and I should say, you have to keep in mind, some of these are recommendations. The planning board is the body that decides what is in fact a condition of approval to the project. But, for example, Conservation Commission will comment on the wetland areas, will comment on best management practices when it comes to any wet area that might be impacted by a development.
What about impacts from a town services or resources standpoint?
So it depends on the scale of the project. Like, for example, Woodmont, we have a fiscal impact analysis that gets into, that's a large project, so that's more involved.
Yep.
But not every project requires that level of analysis, if you will.
But the board has the
Correct.
ability to request a fiscal impact
Yep.
statement or
So-
study.
So if I'm a developer and I want to put in, and I'm sure my example's going to be wrong based upon our regulations, but if I wanted to put in, 25 four-story apartment buildings on a plot or a certain amount of land, that's going to increase the town's population, going to have impact on sewer. Do we ever evaluate, hey, this is going to impact our town on the following? Sewer capacity, number of firefighters, number of police officers, fire equipment. Do we ever do any of that studying, or do we just essentially, we talk about turning widths and, making sure that there's no wetland impact. Where do we talk about what the impact on the community is?
I can speak for like sewer, so, and a good one to use as an example would be McGregor's Cut. McGregor's Cut, the sewer was back down on Mammoth Road. So again, now you want to build all this, you need to be on municipal sewer. So you would be required to upgrade the sewer and extend the sewer all the way up to that point. We have plenty of capacity in the north end of town, so that was not an issue. And again, and everything that they built, Bruce, was brand new. So again, they can build an 8-inch pipe, proper slope to carry 200 units up there. So that one, that's how I can dictate or kind of give you that guidance. And that's through the design review process. So again, Bob looks at that, I look at that, that's cool. Traffic is part of our design review process. In our design review, you look at, again, 200 units, what is gonna be the peak hour?
Yep.
Then it kicks in, a small traffic or a large traffic study. So then we have a powwow with the state, particularly that one, because of Stonehenge, the east end of Stonehenge and the west end of Stonehenge. We have, okay, these are the intersections you need to look at. So that's kind of how we do that. I really can't talk to, like, school children and impact of the fire personnel and stuff like that.
So we do rely on the other municipal departments, like the fire department, for example, to weigh in on if they, because they have a good understanding of their own personnel and apparatus and needs of the department. So if they foresee a potential impact, we would rely on them to comment on that. In addition to that, when the planning department reviews, we do look at the overall densities, school-age children. If the project is of large enough scale or significant enough, there are times where, in my review, I may say, this might have a significant impact to the school, and we need to do an analysis of what that fiscal impact is. But if that is something that that staff doesn't state in their recommendations to the board has a right to ask for that additional information if the board feels that it is necessary.
Is that something in staff's opinion that would be prudent moving forward for the planning of development and future development in the town, to have a consultant or a third party study the impact on the community as it relates to each project?
I don't think it's necessary for each project. I think when we see projects of a large enough scale, typically staff would, well, I would recommend some type of agreement with the developer, similar to the agreement we have with Woodmont, for example, that covers any fiscal impact and making
There
sure.
are other development agreements also that the town has. A certain size, that's where the town council, the town manager get involved, and with the applicant, draw up a whole agreement. So, like, Woodmont has a fairly lengthy agreement. I know McGregor Cut has one, I think so, the other, on Perkins Road, there's one also. Probably check in with either the council or town manager. They are the ones that develop the development agreements, and that's done with the town attorney.
So I guess
That's because of the impact.
I guess what I'm kind of driving at here is Woodmont does their own study of whether or not they've impacted the community, right?
Yes, that's part of, that's written in there.
And the impact has to happen before the town is provided any relief, right? So if,
It happens first, and then the relief is provided.
right, so let's say hypothetically, I was gonna build a 4-story, 55 and older with assisted living building that's gonna have an impact on the fire and EMS services that's gonna occur within our community. I can't enforce anything with the developer until after I run out of ambulances on a day-to-day basis, because they're going to
Yeah,
that
that's-
location,
yeah,
right?
that's
So
what-
I'm trying to proactively say, this building's going to create X number of ambulance calls or X number of police calls, which is gonna equal people or
I think-
apparatus.
So I think maybe what would be helpful is if we could separately go through an actual agreement and analysis so that you can see exactly what the certain criteria are and what the thresholds are. Because it is dependent on the project.
Yeah,
But
'cause
for
we
example,
could-
Wallace Farms, we could go through that to give you kind of a baseline that I think would answer some of your more specific questions.
There's a couple of projects, Bruce, that come to my mind. I was telling Kelly, Wallace Farm, my recollection has a fiscal impact, McGregor's Cut, in possibly even All-American, the south end of town. So again, I think let us do a little digging, and that way you can see what that fiscal impact study is all about.
Yeah, because we could have Mike Malaguti come in and go through what's goes into a development agreement, how it is basically enforced. But I mean, they have to have the impact first before we can
Right.
do anything about it.
There has to be proof of impact.
Yeah,
We can't just assume
Right.
impact.
Well, that's why I'm asking, can we pay someone to study it, that there's gonna be an impact, and then enforce that as part of the, I mean, we're paying a consultant already
Well, I
for a
think-
traffic study,
so-
and then we're enforcing a traffic study, why can't we do the same for an impact on the town?
Well, again, just though, I hear what you're saying, Bruce, but again, the applicant's traffic engineer does the bulk of the work. But you're right, though, with fiscal impact studies, again, like these, Mark Fugere was doing those impact studies for McGregor's Cut and whatnot. Then they would they would submit it to the town, at which time staff would look at it and again, share it with the board.
Yep.
So,
And we used to get that, right? We used to get fiscal impact studies.
correct, yeah.
We don't anymore, right?
I'm the engineer.
No, I know, that's
That's
why I'm asking these questions.
Yeah.
For-
That's a town manager question.
No, for the projects that have these agreements, we do get the impact studies. And they are reviewed, and if they are showing an impact, then adjustments are made accordingly. But there have been none that have shown impact. So in other words,
And are
they're-
we choosing the fiscal review part, or is the applicant?
it's provided by the applicant based on the terms of the agreement,
But again, it's
which
typical.
we establish the agreement with them. It's an agreement. We've agreed to the terms.
And it's typically somebody that has experience preparing these fiscal,
Right.
Yes.
something stupid, but it's not me.
I get it, but, I mean, I remember when a certain urgent care came into town and they told us it was gonna be 7 calls for the year. And we did 7 calls the first day, so that's what I'm, when I talk to people out in the community that the town wants to grow, but the taxpayer doesn't wanna fund the growth that new development is bringing in, I have no problem with paying my share, as most residents don't. But if you're gonna bring something to town that has a significant impact on the community and its services, then you should bring forth those resources to reduce the impact. And that's kind of when I look up the definition of planning, that's what I come up with. So those,
Yeah, you have to look at planning, what the state allows us to do and everything. So it's based upon statutory law and case law.
Yeah, I get that, but there's.
It-
Well, I mean,
it-
as I say, just in the interest of time, not trying to cut anybody off, but I'm happy to sit down and go through specific examples with you. And then we can certainly schedule a second session to
Yeah,
talk
we'll
about
have
any
another
specific
session.
analyses.
But another vehicle to determine that is a capital improvement plan. And that's where each department has to come forward and what they see for future needs and everything.
Sure,
And that's
but
presented
you
to,
can't recommend capital improvements on projects that haven't come before you yet.
Correct.
Right.
So.
But I do,
and-
so I think these are good future topics, absolutely.
All right, I'm good, thank you, Mr. Chair.
If we had impact fees, you'd have to have a capital improvement
Oh,
plan.
no,
because
impact fee is a dirty word here.
it's,
We don't talk about
That's
those.
that's another whole word. We've had bad experience
Yeah.
with.
I like
that.
I like assessments, fiscal impact studies. I like those words. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay, Jake,
I had 3 pages of notes here, but most of them I've slowly checked off as everybody got through the board.
Don't
But
worry
you go
about the
first
last
next
one.
time.
We're on slide 3, so.
Come on, guys. We talked about, you just talked about, the state had to review something for McGregor Cut, between both Stonehenge and Litchfield Road. How often does the state have to review something, anything involved in a project that comes to Londonderry?
So again, DOT,
Yeah,
so the way I look at it, Jake, and how it actually works is, again, Sims Drive is the town's driveway to Rockingham Road. So again, if you read the permit that the town has, it's based on, X amount of development. So initially, when Jacksbridge Road was constructed, the developer had done a study, figured out, okay, we're gonna have X amount of industrial land out there. Then they took a dart, threw it against the board and says, we're gonna have this type of industry, this type of industry. And so their traffic was based on, we'll say, 1,000 cars a day. So that was where our permit was limited to. Once we getting to that point, it's like, okay, time out, Trotter, need to relook at the permit out there and start looking at what additional improvements need to be done out there. So depending, again, yeah.
Well, I think just generally speaking, a majority of the time, there is some type of state permit associated with an application. Again, generally, as long as staff knows that any applicable application has been applied for, that can be encompassed in the conditions of approval, meaning
yeah,
state
I've
review
heard us say,
process
yeah.
takes typically significantly longer than the
Yeah.
planning board approval process. And so we understand that, and therefore we're comfortable, as long as it's been applied for, conditioning an approval on receipt of that final review from the state.
And at times, it's nice, so when they do submit something to the state will send it a letter acknowledging that it's been received. They'll also continue to send us things saying, what were you guys thinking? When you they'll send 5 pages of design review or of comments too.
So if the state's, whatever section of an application the state's reviewing, will our third-party consultant also review that same portion of the plan, or is it, the state is reviewing it, the state's kind of acting as a third-party reviewer in that? Are we also reviewing?
Our
the state
regulations
might-
are not totally synced up. Again, state loves infiltration, does not infiltrate on January 1st, there's no infiltration that's occurring. So we don't allow infiltration them to have that credit. So we are more stringent in that case.
Than the state's
Than the state.
requirements themselves. So
Correct.
we have things that are above and beyond what the state
Correct.
requirement is, like you're saying, with infiltration.
Yeah, so that's why, again, when they submit it to the state, yeah, they might have to produce 2 drainage reports, but it works.
We talked about rounds of review. You said in the escrow, they usually figure for 2 rounds of review.
Correct.
So is that, they review a project, they have 10 comments, say they have 10 comments, you go to design review, you discuss those 10 comments, the applicant submits an answer to those 10 comments.
Yep.
That second round of review, is that just,
That's confirming their responses.
yeah, answering or rebutting their responses to
Correct.
something?
The theory is that we're essentially concurring with their responses. That's the goal. So that at that second meeting, we're in a position where everyone, meaning engineer, applicant, staff, are in a place where we can say, yep, we're comfortable proceeding with formal submission.
Is there ever times that there are comments asked on the second round of review that were not asked on the first round of reviews that aren't related to the questions that had already been asked?
That will happen if the plan was changed or revised in a way that if it's showing new information that
Then-
wasn't considered as part of the initial review.
then it gets,
That
it
can
would get
happen.
reviewed again.
It can be a new comment, if you will, as part of the second.
Yeah, okay.
And then,
Because again, Jake, I'm sorry, because they didn't understand the comment, so they went down the wrong road, and they just,
Yeah,
they made more of an issue about it.
okay.
And just going back to your comment about, you know, the rounds of design review, I've been here long enough where, again, it could be a simple, you know, 3-lot subdivision, and there's only 4 comments. It's like, you know what, guys, and I know who they are, you got it, you know, no need to go through another round of design review, go formal. Let's go downstairs.
yeah,
You-
so
you- you got
I
it.
think the point is, we do try and use discretion, if you will, saying, you know, okay, like John, the example just highlighted, yep, okay, it's minimal comments. We've done this many times with this particular engineer before. We're pretty confident in the end product. Go to formal. You're good.
If there are, say you have a comment from our third-party review, it's answered by the engineer for whoever the application is. If the answer is not satisfactory, how does that work? Or what constitutes the answer to not be satisfactory if they're answering one of the design review questions? What is it that constituted as not, you know, if it's not satisfactory, does that turn into like a waiver request to a regulation, or?
Again, a lot of times, again, so if it's an engineering, so again, there's discretion in engineering, and then there's engineering, you know? So again, if there's, more often than not, again, an engineer is pretty black and white. So again, they may disagree with, but again, there's engineering standards. You know, you match crowns of pipe, that's typical engineering practices. So again, the kid never did that, he never knew that's what you're supposed to do when you increase the size of the pipe. So that is, you know, they don't have a leg to stand on, really, you know. Very rarely will they ask for a waiver from an engineering standard.
Okay.
But it is an option. I should make
Yeah.
sure they have the option to request a waiver if they
Okay.
choose. But sometimes they request them in advance, and
Yeah.
we'll review that waiver request as well to make it clear where staff stands.
Where staff
On a
stands on a waiver, yeah, okay.
And one, Jake, again, just not to bore you, but again, the
You
cleansing.
don't bore me, John.
Good, thank you. The cleansing velocities of stormwater in a pipe. If you don't get enough water in the pipe, you never achieve the 2 feet per second to get the crap out of the pipe.
To get
The
the
cleansing velocities, that's what we call it. So again, that, they would have to ask a waiver. I would support it because again, practical, they don't get enough water in it. It's the end of the line, or it's the beginning of the line, depending on which way you look at it.
We've talked a bit on our third-party review companies. We've got 2, one of them Stantec, what is the other one?
Oil Tanner Associates.
Oil Tanner. Is there anything in particular they do? Because I know I feel like everything that I do see says Stantec's name on it as opposed to Oil Tanner.
Well, Tanner does all Woodmont
Oil
stuff.
Tanner does all of the Woodmont reviews. That was essentially an agreement that was established when Woodmont was established.
Okay. We've answered that. I think, and for clarification on, Lynn had talked about it a little bit. So the Heritage Commission and the Conservation Commission meetings, if I understood what we were saying correctly, those are essentially part of design review.
Correct.
Okay. And those are all met within that 30-day timeframe?
Most of the time, yes.
How often
I
does?
think with Heritage, if they have to come back a second time, if the plan goes through, it becomes a condition on that plan.
Okay. How often does Heritage meet?
Bi-monthly.
Bi-monthly? Do you feel as though that's sufficient for our process, that Heritage Commission meets bi-monthly, or should they be more of a monthly meeting?
They have met monthly, you know, upon request.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
it's, so
Yes,
they,
we do. We have offered special meetings, if you will, if a project happens to be on a different timeline, and that hasn't been an issue. But bi-monthly, I haven't seen it be a major issue
Okay,
as of
so you
yet.
don't think there's something that would warrant a monthly meeting at this point, anyway?
Not that I've,
It
not
hasn't at
in
this
my
point.
experience so
If
far.
if there was, I think the commission would go to monthly meetings.
And when you go back to the 30 days, Jake, and again, like Kelly says, one thing that we don't say too much about is, again, the initial sit down with somebody. We sat down with them on the first of the month. Okay, these are the steps you're gonna have to go through, Concom, Heritage. Oh, by the way, Heritage only meets Well, I don't have my architecturals ready anyways. Well, then the next one is, so, hey, Mr. Developer, plan accordingly and get your architect going, or
And I think too, because we typically have after the 30 days, we typically have a meeting to talk about the comments.
Yep.
That affords a little bit more time to get on, maybe then, if the Heritage Commission meeting, for example, didn't fall in, they can catch it either immediately following that sit-down meeting or in that time frame between scheduling that meeting and when they get the comments. Usually it works out.
I think it's a little silly
Heritage
too.
is scheduled like a second meeting because they don't have the architectural plans together.
Yeah.
So it's kind of premature, but at least they're on there and they know what's happening.
And I don't think it's unusual to any other communities, though, too, that there's a Heritage Commission or an
Yeah.
Architectural Review Committee.
Yeah,
So-
some sort of,
A real developer will understand, yeah, I gotta go to those people too. and-
yeah. We talked that the design review is highly recommended, but not required. Is it something that should be more of a requirement than a recommendation, or?
That's a statutory issue. The
Based
statute states that the design review is optional, non-binding.
Okay.
So the applicant has every right to just submit straight to the planning board and go through that formal review process.
Yeah, that's cast in state law.
This is where the lookbook would come in.
Yeah.
This
Quite
went
often,
through-
Jake, I recommend that they stay upstairs and working in the war room before coming down here. Let's work out the issues upstairs, then when we come down here, if it's waivers and ultimately, again, you're the judge and jury, but let's work out the things upstairs.
And I think that, so I've worked in a few different municipalities, and I've done the process where the applicant goes straight to the planning board, and it does, in most instances, result in multiple planning board meetings. And so here, it's basically multiple design review meetings.
As opposed to planning board.
Right, and I think something to keep in mind with that is that we're not also wasting the public's time a lot, or the board's time. That's my opinion. I think the design review process, the way we do it here, is more streamlined than going directly to the board
To
without
the
that
board
process.
themselves.
It's
Yeah.
much more efficient because going back 30-odd years, the planning board was involved with a lot of the planning, some of it because the engineer didn't have their act together.
Yeah.
So it just wasted a lot of time and had multiple continuances. We had, like, in the course of a year, a plan might have 4 continuances just because they didn't have everything all together. So to save the board's time, then why should the board be doing engineering when their engineer is not doing it properly? And we've had the instance where the applicant and the engineer have gotten into arguments right in public. In fact, we had one that, we continued, they went outside, and I heard the whole board, and it was on the microphones too, in the old building, where the applicant was yelling at his engineer and fired him. So a lot of it is, some of the engineers that aren't as good, they try to cover for themselves, especially here where they're, the applicant is here also. So there's a lot of back and forth that you can tell from some of them out there. You just look at their faces, you know what's happening. So
And then-
there's a struggle there too,
Yeah.
so.
Yeah, and then just on the last comment, Kelly, I think you were saying that you started including the applicant themselves in communication. Something along those lines you said a little while ago, that you started to include the applicant, not just the engineer, in any communications between the town
Yep.
and the engineering firm.
Yeah, and that's really to make sure that all parties associated with the project are receiving the same information at the same time.
Yeah.
That's essential, because we've had applicants come and say, my engineer said that, I didn't give my engineer permission to do that, so.
Yeah.
There's gotta be you want the communication between the applicant
Yeah,
and the
no,
engineer.
I think that's,
to-
I
to-
think that's
To get
great.
things going, and then you want the communication with the applicant, the engineer, and our town staff.
Correct.
So that everything's on the same wavelength, so when it gets here, we don't have to put up with the tussles back and forth between especially between the engineer and the applicant.
Yeah, no, I think the communication's good. So, I'm good, thank you.
All right.
Mr. Chair, I just have one question before we move on.
Sure.
You guys had said we've had the same third-party reviewers for 20 and as well 10 years. How often do we look at what their pricing is and try to compare it to the market? Or do we go out to look at potentially new third-party reviewers sometimes and get updated pricing? Do you think the pricing is fair?
My opinion, I think the pricing is fair when I see what the market rate is for engineering firms.
Yeah, I'll defer more so to John, because he also sees the construction costs and whatnot that I don't typically see, but I have not, based on prior experience in other towns and here, the fees that we have are not.
They're
out of
not
the ordinary.
astronomical.
They're in line with other consulting firms.
Okay, good to hear.
And you get what you pay for.
Of course, right.
Yeah.
Okay. So I was gonna make a similar suggestion, is that we go out to get more third-party reviewers on a more regular basis. I have noticed that from my own personal experience, that some of the things that they do come back with, from review 1 to review 2 to review 3, I understand that they're gonna review something that they originally commented on, but I have experience, maybe I'm wrong, but they come up with other things in that process too, that really isn't affected by the redesign that they originally suggested. So it's kind of like getting two bites at an apple. And I don't necessarily think, I think that that leads to a lot of the frustration from our consumers, the folks coming in and asking to get an approval. And I was gonna suggest too, that when you submit for the escrow, that you get it from more than, if it's an RFP process, you get it from both of, or more than one of one of the firms. So the consumer also has that option. I think it's the town going to one or the other. Is that correct? Or do you get an RFP from both of them to review it?
We don't, because HTA is primarily Woodmont. That was the reasoning, as far as I understand it, for bringing a second consultant on board, is because Woodmont is so significant in size that we needed, the thought process of the town was to not overload just one consultant. We don't have a practice of getting two different estimates.
Could you revise that?
What's that?
Could you revise that? Is that a suggestion we can make as a board?
The other thing that that Kelly tries to do though too is, again, knowing what their workload is. So again, we know that, again, they need to produce the report, finish the design review in 30 days.
Yeah.
So,
I appreciate that. I'm on that side where I get a lot of that unsolicited third-party comments on the process. And I think that might be a way for you to eliminate that level of criticism on your end. If you said, hey, we're giving you guys an option, this is what they've come back with for escrows. You
Right.
pick it. It puts a little bit more in the consumer, the developer's ballpark, and then takes a little bit of burden off of you too, right?
So we can certainly discuss that kind of internally, what that would look like, but I want to make sure we're clear about, we do we have a lot of projects typically at the same time. And so.
So I get it. You're
is-
trying to load balance,
Right,
right?
and so it's a load balancing, so I just want to make sure that that's understood, so.
So maybe you need
meaning
more
if we
than
just
two.
start giving options,
That's one more administrative hurdle.
it's going to result in us saying no occasionally to an applicant, so just, but we can certainly look at it and look at what
And
that.
I'd be very hesitant to let the consumer make the choice as to who they want
Why?
for doing the, I don't, I think.
If
I don't
you're
think
based
that's
off a quality-based review, why?
I think the staff would be the people that I would want to task with making that decision. I wouldn't want the consumer to make that decision. I think it just opens
If
it
they're all
up too much
qualified for the job,
for,
well, I'll
it opens it
rep,
up too much for hanky-panky, for the lack of a more
no, I don't think so.
discretionary word.
So I'll respectfully disagree with you on that. Woodmont, I've heard a lot of discussion on Woodmont and the different process there and, you know, the impact fees and things like that, but wasn't Woodmont not that was like a mini site master plan, or that was a completely different?
Yeah, it's its own separate master plan.
Yeah.
And everything, so. that
So,
was-
and that allowed for some of the things, like you were saying, Bruce, where they'd go in and they say, okay, what's the impact to the fire, or what have you? And it also, so what I was gonna suggest is that there's a minimum criteria for acreage when you do a mini master plan, right?
100 acres.
For a planned unit development, it's 100 contiguous acres.
Yeah. So, maybe as we are looking at less, you know, the town starts getting developed and there's less contiguous acres of 100. I thought it was more than that, but, so maybe you reduce that. Because, you know, we heard Insight Technologies the other day, and they had a very creative concept, which I believe during the conceptual hearing, we're all like, well, this is really cool. And-
It's in essence a PUD, what they're trying to create.
And
Right, but
so-
they don't have 100 acres, right?
They don't, they're close, but I will say that was one of the suggestions that I made to them in our
Preliminary meeting.
preliminary meeting was, is there potential for you to, and I get your point, that the fact
Maybe-
is they didn't have the 100.
Yeah.
But I did suggest, because they're close, maybe looking at other parcels around them to get that 100 to go through the PUD
Yeah.
process.
But it would
Well,
also
what I'm
take-
suggesting is
It would also
maybe
take them
you-
longer though, too, Johnny, because again, then they.
I
then they-
understand that,
then they
yeah.
need to come up
You have
with,
to
so what
do
is
that
your
whole planning
overall-
process, yeah.
Right, and what's your traffic, da-da-da-da.
But yeah, I mean, we can
But
certainly look into.
It opens it
the
up,
potential of
to that
reducing the
creative-
contiguous acres required with the PUD.
yeah, and it opens up to those, you know, addressing each plan on its individual merits and addressing a lot of the assessments or things to that go along with it. So it might lead to a little bit more creative type of development that, you know, town will
We
want.
have just one firm that we're using for Woodmont? And are we using them exclusively for Woodmont?
Or. they do
We
What
have
I mean is-
one firm reviews Woodmont.
So we,
Depending on the balance of projects, they may see other projects outside of Woodmont. That's something that I use my discretion to determine.
so the third-party reviewer for Woodmont probably has a little bit of bandwidth? Or we don't use them unless it's for Woodmont, and then if our primary is overwhelmed?
If our,
I think they both have the same bandwidth.
they both have the same bandwidth. It also depends kind of what's going on in Woodmont. They're different factors, but if our, I'll use the term primary reviewer is overloaded with projects in my professional opinion and review, then I will make a decision to send it to the other reviewer.
When we were doing the master plan for Woodmont, Stantec was quite busy, and they really couldn't, you know, take on any more. And we didn't want a backup from our third-party review to delay, you know, a developer or an applicant. So that process went through actually the town manager and, you know, town council to bring on a second, and there was the quality, you know, bidding and everything. So because you always look at what they can offer first before you start talking prices. Once you selected a firm, then you can start talking prices. And I know with Kevin, it was always that way, the same with Mike. So we actually need two because of the workload that they have, so the plans aren't delayed because the third-party reviewer is too busy.
Yeah, just, you know, just doesn't feel, I'm not crazy about it, that it's only two.
Yeah, do I get a, are
I-
they paid up front or like, are they paid after, if, ask this a different way. Are they on a retainer payment schedule or are they paid at, per review?
Per review.
Per review.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, and I think from, my experience and like, not, obviously, not like this, but three's always been a good number, from all audit perspectives, all types of audit firms, consulting firms. Not saying that this is, completely similar, but it creates that champion versus challenger type modality, and in addition to ensuring the potential best best price, you also get best quality and such like that. I'm not sure if that makes sense in this situation, but I think that would just be one of my recommendations to potentially look at a third one, especially if Woodmont has one, and then the other one is for our other for all of our other projects here, and it just from a comfort level it kind of
Creates a monopoly.
makes some sense there.
Sure,
But
so,
I don't know. But you guys are obviously the professionals.
no, so I think generally what I'm hearing is some more information and is being requested by the board for our third-party review process and how we go about selecting consultants and things of that nature, which we can certainly look into at a different time. But I just want to make sure I can get through everything this evening.
Okay.
Unless there's any more questions about design review.
Yeah, we gotta move on, we don't wanna be here all night, so.
Okay,
Okay,
so,
Kelly,
I'll be here all night.
formal review.
Maybe you break it into two sections.
I mean, we can continue this, but I think it's important to
Yeah.
go through it at one time. Formal review process is again, governed by state statute. This is a formal application process. It's binding and it requires a public hearing with the planning board. Formal applications are also required to comply with our published submission deadlines, which again are referenced in our site plan and subdivision regulations. And those submission deadlines correspond with the first and second week meetings of the month. The formal application is submitted again, in accordance with the items listed in our regulations. So there's a checklist associated, there's the application itself. There are applicable studies submitted, the same information as design review, it's just that we're now in a formal process. So that formal application is submitted and reviewed by the planning department for initial completeness. Provided it's gone through design review, it's sent to the third party and any other applicable municipal staff for that formal review. And then, again, we get those comments back and compile them and incorporate those comments as part of the staff memorandum to the planning board. The regulations, our regulations don't specify a specific time frame for that review, but the time period from the submission date to the planning board meeting is generally 20 days. So that is the time frame, if you will. And as the board's already aware, we have been in the practice of providing the staff memo at the meeting. And we haven't been providing it to the board or the applicant in advance of the meeting, but that is something that we've discussed internally, and we feel that it is a possibility for us to receive everything we need, comments from third party and any other applicable departments, compile those comments on the Friday prior to the planning board meeting, and have everything put together in a staff memorandum by that following Monday, close of business, and get that staff memo with recommendations to both the board and the applicant on Monday, close of business. So in other words, in advance of the planning board hearing. So that, like I said, that's something John and I discussed. We think it's feasible. The caveats that we'll place, or disclaimers we'll put on that is, if we do that, we want to make clear that it's likely that if there's an unfavorable recommendation or comment in our staff memo, and we provide that to the applicant in advance, there's a possibility for them to try and meet with staff, try and get new information to staff in a very small window, so essentially 48 hours between the time they get the memo and the actual hearing. And so we want to be very clear that it's not reasonable for staff to meet with or review any new information in that small period of time. But I think what that time period does allow for is for the applicant to digest the information, potentially come to the board with any waiver requests, for example, that maybe they didn't have in advance of the meeting, and be, I guess, a little bit more aware, if you will, if they should have been prior to the memo, but if they weren't for any reason, it allows them to be by the time they get to the actual meeting.
I can tell you what you're gonna see is that they'll get that memo on Monday afternoon, and they're gonna diligently work to revise those plans to show up Wednesday night saying, here's the revised plans, I've reviewed all the comments, you're gonna look to us and we're gonna say, no idea. Haven't had an opportunity to look at it. So what do you do?
That's why we have, the 2-week submission period. They have to have it in 2 weeks before the meeting date. So,
Correct.
So
Because
that we
again,
have time to review.
so you get time to review.
Right.
Yeah,
So.
Like
so
back
if
in the old days,
They
right,
make
Art?
changes,
You
that
guys-
has to be,
yeah.
at a future meeting.
You used to do the engineering the night of the meeting, right?
Yeah.
And
But I
that's what
think,
eliminated that stuff.
In the old days, we did engineering on the fly, and didn't always work right.
Right, so I think just, my point is, staff won't be reviewing anything in that time frame, and it's just simply not realistic or feasible for us to do so. And we wouldn't advise the board to act on anything new either, if you were to ask us for our
We
recommendation.
would want to see the plan that was submitted and had been
Correct, but
reviewed, not.
what I think it does do is give a little bit better optics, if you will, because we are hearing complaints or people taking issue with not getting the staff memo in advance. And so we have made an effort to figure out if that is in fact feasible based on the time it takes to review and compile comments. And this is the solution, if you will, that we came up with. And I think that it's progress, if anything. So that's something that we can do if the board would like us to do it.
I think that'll be a good step forward, as developers won't be completely blindsided by comments from the staff ahead of time. They're at least able to have a narrative for a response to the.
It will be a blindsided thing. Fly it by our attorney also, see what, get input there about, details to the board because of concern about bias, from board members.
Mr. Chair, can,
I'm sorry, say that one again?
I'm
Art?
not, I didn't catch.
Yeah, check with our attorney on that also, that we're legally okay.
There's no legal reason we can't provide the staff memo in advance.
Yeah, yes. I know Mike Ramsdell was very concerned about board bias, and us ended up in court or something, because
Just not a-
members started talking beforehand, you know.
Yeah, I mean, so that would be up to the board to make sure you're holding each other accountable for any necessary refusals and
That's true.
bias.
Jake?
Does the staff memo make us biased?
Yeah, I guess that was gonna be my first thing. I don't know how a staff memo necessarily makes us biased.
Lawyers aren't like engineers. They don't have any
Yeah.
rules that they have to follow by. It's very simple with engineering. It's not with lawyers.
I think, you know, this is something that's come up a handful of times, something I have mentioned every time it does happen. You know, I think out of anything, it's more of a, you know, it's almost kind of a, I don't know if professional courtesy is the right word, but, you know, as somebody who was coming in as an applicant, I would want to know what's going to be given back to me before, you know, before the meeting, so I can also make a reasonable decision of, you know, if they do have a staff memo that's got 5 things on it that staff doesn't recommend, I, as the applicant, could look at that and say, well, I'm certainly not prepared for this meeting. Instead of hiring my engineer to come to the meeting, hiring my lawyer to come to the meeting, hiring everybody else who I have to come to the meeting just to be told, you know, get confused because they didn't understand any of this beforehand. So I think, I'd have to agree with Kelly. I think it's good progress. You know, it did kind of happen for a little bit in COVID. I believe we were getting staff memos like a week beforehand. And it,
No.
Well,
maybe not a
if it was-
week, but
I-
we
I
were
guess
getting,
it was a few days before.
there
It
was a
like
couple days where
Tuesday before the
whole,
meeting.
exactly, the whole
Plus the
thing was,
1620.
the whole thing was put together and we had the ability to, you know, to read the staff memorandum a day before a meeting and not the day of the meeting. But, you know, I certainly think that, to me, it's just good business practice of, you know, why set somebody up to come in and fail? You know, let them decide if they want to come in and challenge staff's recommendation. I agree that there's, the town should not be expected to review any changes between that 24 or 48-hour period from if you get your recommendation on Monday to Wednesday. I think that's very unfair to ask of you guys, and hugely unrealistic. But I think getting the information out to the customer is relatively important. So I think it's a good idea for one. Just kind of seems to make good sense from a good business standpoint, you know, and at the end of the day, they're customers.
Now, Kelly, if there was a memo that went out that, you know, there's a lot of markups and said that, you know, you're missing a lot of these items, they then got that memorandum, would they then have that time to say, oh, I'm not ready to go to the meeting, can I request more time?
Yep, they,
Some of them will do that, Ted,
They will.
and some of them will come and argue with you.
I just want to make sure that
Just
that
to
then
answer
may
your
give them the time
You
to
experienced
say,
that last
oh,
month.
I need more time then.
To answer you, they have the ability to ask for continuance all the way up until the meeting. They can come to the meeting and ask for a continuance, or they can tell me in advance of the meeting.
But they may not know that they have so many issues wrong with their plan.
So, at least in my time here so far, we've made an effort to contact the applicant and make them aware of that.
Okay.
Verbally, not in writing. And sometimes that results in, okay, thanks, I'll continue it. And sometimes that results in, well, what specifically are you talking about? And they want the memorandum. So,
And I'll see you in an hour.
yeah, and that does happen. I've had it happen where I've made the call and literally within 5 minutes, an engineer was in my department wanting to meet with me. And that's fine, I can manage that, that's not an issue. But I just want to make sure that we're being realistic about, that the board is realistic about expectations it has for staff.
Of
And
course.
Yeah,
That's what I want to be clear
But at least
about.
this may give them more of an opportunity to realize that, oh, maybe I really do need to make a continuance.
And Kelly, I just,
Jeff?
earlier you definitely alluded to it just now that the applicant does have, you kind of do tell the applicant, verbally, what they're missing, but it's not formally until they don't formally process it until they receive the memo, potentially. So I'm definitely in agreement, getting the staff memorandum up, out to the board and to the public as, feasible as, it seems fit. But I'm also wondering, where's the opportunity to kind of really kind of drive home to the applicant that, hey, I'm telling you that there's gonna be an issue here.
That's the design review process.
Yep.
That's where that takes place, and most of the time, those items are addressed, and we're at a point where staff is comfortable recommending a conditional approval.
And it's when they're not addressed, that's when we
Typically, yeah, I mean,
have these conflicts come up.
right. I mean, I would say, for the most part, when the board hears applications, they're ready to go, a majority. There are occasionally ones that have a number of outstanding items, they're not ready to go. Sometimes that's because they went straight to the formal process, they didn't go through design review. Sometimes it's because they went through design review, but they're on their own timeline, and they had to get, for business purposes, had to move forward. Whatever the factors are, but the purpose of that design review process is to make sure that staff is clear about our regulations and what our expectations are.
They've submitted stuff without even discussing anything with the staff. And then I get a phone call saying, I know this isn't gonna be right, but we have the chief guy looking at this stuff, so it'll be right. That doesn't mean nothing. And it was a shit show.
If we've had applicants come in with a, formal application, there are problems, and some will change and go through the design review process, because then there's a dialogue with staff. We always recommend, especially conceptual discussion, they come in, we recommend that they discuss it with staff.
Right.
Work with staff. That's been the mantra.
If you're gonna ask for a waiver, you need to have justification for the waiver. So what is your justification? You're just asking for a waiver without discussing it, and if you don't have a justification, at least we can guide them that, yes, you can do it, or we'll support it or not.
Mr. Chair, I think, just not to kind of belabor on the subject here, but
Gonna change the subject, Jake?
no, not at all. I think that in doing this, there can never be an applicant that comes up and said, well, I didn't know until just now, and if they make the decision to say, well, I'm still gonna continue on to the meeting tonight, knowing on Monday they had all these issues, they can no longer come to the board and say, well, I had no idea. It's like, well, you did know, because you got told on Monday. It was, you made the decision either to not continue it, or to try and do what you want to do tonight. But there can no longer be somebody sitting there looking to the left going, I didn't know any of this until 2 hours ago.
Maybe someone will try that, though.
And they can't now.
Well, I would agree with you, Jake, but again, and we'll see if we go down this route.
Oh, I'm sure.
Oh,
It's
yeah,
gonna
and then
be
they're
different,
gonna try
for
and
sure.
drag you into this,
Yeah.
the engineering and stuff like that, so just
Yeah.
be cautious.
And that's why we're having the conversation now with the board, so that
Yeah.
we're very clear about expectations.
I'm looking at your notes on here. I know they're not on there, but
Yep.
underneath this. Planning, this was something I was talking about earlier. Planning board hearing scheduled, first week regular meeting is new applications. Second week is continuance discussions and board work. And the board or the board chairperson has the ability to waive this schedule. So we would have the ability to say, let's hear this at the first meeting instead of the second. When somebody comes in and we continue it, or they asked for a continuance, we would have the ability, instead of them waiting 60 days, essentially, they're only waiting 30.
Right, so in the example
Or
you
not
raised,
60,
you
but
raised earlier about, and I think you may have even raised it at the meeting, when talking about continuing an application. continuing it to a date certain is a requirement.
Yeah.
It's up to the board which date that is. Typically, we follow what's in our
Yeah,
regulations, but the
but we
board can
do
make the
have
decision.
that flexibility if
The
we
board
see
can make its
fit.
own decision about when they want to continue something.
Okay.
But there's
Of
gonna be a
course, it has
reason
to,
expressed for that
Yeah.
change.
Yep.
the applicant, this is an obvious statement, but you should also make sure it's going to work with the applicant as well. But
Absolutely.
the board has the ability to continue an application to a date certain. It's up to the board what that date is.
Okay, thank you.
Probably be up to the ability of the engineer to get what's needed done.
Typically, it's what time they need to address any outstanding comments, but
Yeah, no, I'm just looking at it, that, you know, the last meeting, I know it was discussed that we knew there, or it wasn't the last meeting anymore, I think it was 2 meetings ago. It was discussed that everybody knew we had a large meeting, you know, and we might not get through it. So to me, it seemed like there might have been, out of a courtesy to us, a continuance on a few plans, knowing that the meeting was gonna be very long. So instead of making them wait until the second meeting, which would be next week, we did have the ability to say, well, let's put them on the first meeting of the month, even though it's technically a continuance.
yes.
Thank you.
The only other thing, the only other thought though too, right? Again, so if some of them, when they're asked for a continuance and they know that they're pretty far along, some of them will want that time an opportunity to address the comments. So again, if they're gonna address the comments, they're not gonna be, we won't have the proper time to review that. So we just need to make the engineer aware of it, you know.
And also, it's what's scheduled for future meetings also. I've even discussed with Kelly, how many, like, new plans should we hear at one time? And if all can't be done, then they get pushed off to the next month for a first meeting. So,
Yeah.
but, I mean, this is, yes, as soon as I get through here.
Okay.
Johnny?
Are you done?
Yep, I'm done.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, I think it's, I think I like the Friday prior or the Monday prior. Maybe to help with your concern is that you give also in writing the applicant the possible, like, you're not gonna be able to fix it between here and Wednesday, but you can continue it, or you can go and argue your piece with the board,
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, so it's kind of setting the expectation up front. I think it'd be respectful of all of our time too, your time, the applicant's time, and our time too, not to watch the fireworks going on ahead of us, so.
It happens once in a while.
Sometimes they're fun, but.
Yeah. A little excitement. Okay, Kelly, we'll continue.
All right, so next we'll go over completeness, so Londonderry's current process, like I said, we provide a staff memo to the board, which consists, and I should back up a little bit, we're talking about when we get to the planning board meeting. We provide a staff memo that consists of a recommendation on completeness. Staff uses our checklist, which is referenced in our regulations, to determine completeness. Completeness is also governed by state statute, and the statute states that the planning board shall specify by regulation what constitutes a completed application sufficient to invoke jurisdiction to obtain approval. A completed application means that sufficient information is included or submitted to allow the board to proceed with consideration and to make an informed decision. So I think, as I said, staff uses the checklist to determine completeness. I think that, if we consider the language in the statute, it talks about sufficient information being included or submitted to allow the board to proceed and make an informed decision. So I guess what I'm getting at is there is potential for the board to consider an application complete while still using the checklist as a tool to evaluate if there is sufficient information included to allow the board to make a decision. So my reason for saying this is because we've seen recent applications where staff has a recommendation on completeness, and we say, there's 5 checklist items that are outstanding. We don't recommend this is complete. And I've heard board members question that. And so this is me providing the board information about how you can make your own decision when it comes to completeness. So in other words, if the board as a whole feels that there's sufficient information provided before you to make a decision on completeness and accept the application and move forward with the hearing process, you can do so. We can still provide a staff recommendation, but again, this is information for the board, so that you have it, so that you can decide what to do with it or what not to do with it. But as I say, the current process now is staff provides a recommendation on completeness that is based on a checklist. And we can proceed with that process, or we can look into doing things differently if the board has a suggestion on that. And I should say too, I don't need an answer this evening. This is just food for thought, if you will. I think maybe digesting this information and then talking about it at a later date would be beneficial. But again, just information for the board about how you can utilize your authority, your jurisdiction to act on these items.
I have a question real quick.
Okay.
In your notes here, you have commentary on Merrimack and Derry. I'm wondering if at some point you're able to provide commentary on say how Portsmouth and Manchester and Nashua conduct their planning departments in Concord, as well as, we're one of the largest communities in the whole state. I'm wondering how they may also conduct business as well.
Sure, I can certainly look into additional communities. I chose those 2 in particular because their regulations are very similar to ours. Their process is very similar to ours in terms of review, and in terms of how they make their recommendations. So trying to compare apples to apples, if you
Of
will.
course, I'm just curious.
But
that's
I
all.
can certainly look into other communities as
Yeah, I
well.
think there's a fair amount of commonality between all the municipalities in the state. I mean, it comes pretty much from, the statutes and also the municipal association. They have their recommendations.
It also doesn't help that we have 200 different forms of government within the state of New Hampshire?
275.
275, thank you.
But
I was
who's
close.
counting?
Yeah.
Well, that's the number of municipalities. They all basically the same form
It's
of
not
of
unincorporated
government.
areas, all right?
Yeah, because, I think there's 5 cities forms of government. Municipal towns, the selectmen or open town meeting or budgetary town meeting. That's it for towns. That's all by statute. Jake?
So just on the checklist side of things, I think, so if somebody came to us with a plan, they came to formal review with a plan, and the owner's signature was not on the plan, that's a checklist item, right? So then that would be not considered complete, the checklist?
Some of those things we have discretion on, Jake.
Okay. Much like they have discretion on, I think, we should have, look at it as a whole and see, what are the checklist items that are missing? Is it, a utility clearance letter that is not submitted? Is that something that really warrants us not hearing the plan that's in front of us? Or is it something that we could say, well, we understand you don't have it. I don't know if it would be something where the utility clearance letter would become a condition of approval. Although it's not on the checklist, it's a condition of approval that they submit their utility clearance letters. So we've got the ability to see a plan. Does that make any sense?
Which is
The
typically
the
what we
basic
do.
question before the board, really, for completeness, does the board have sufficient information to make a informed decision?
Correct.
That's really it. If
Correct.
the board feels it has sufficient information in which to make, a correct legal decision, yes.
And Jake, a lot of times, that's one waiver request that we support. We'll support for acceptance purposes only, then they need
Yeah,
to
you'll
still
put-
secure
Yeah.
that permit. A checklist item, Jake, I would never support would be a waiver to a drainage report. I heard some arguments that a drainage report was submitted. Yeah, on your first initial design of the project, but that was 8 months ago now you've changed the project considerably, so the drainage report that you submitted is irrelevant. Well, we submitted the report.
So they'd have to make a whole new drainage report,
Correct. And I
Updated
heard that
according to-
argument.
According to plan, but
updated with the plan.
Yeah, so that would be something that I would never support.
And that should be something that reasonably should be done. I mean, if they're not changing that or updating the plan on that, well, then that falls on that.
Right, so I guess, so that's exactly my point, is the board, in addition to looking at staff's recommendation, you can also use your own reasonable judgment to determine if you have sufficient information to accept an application as complete. So I just wanted to make sure the board's aware that is allowed, and that it's within your jurisdiction to do so. But I'm not saying go against staff all the
Yeah,
time.
no,
I'm saying
God, no.
it is within the board's right to make that decision.
The operative word is reasonableness. That's
Yeah.
what you find in the case law a lot.
Yep.
Is a reasonableness.
Fair and reasonable.
Johnny?
Is there and I've seen this in other planning boards in other towns, is there a way to distinguish between like the signature, owner's signature and a signature block, or the little items that are, at the bottom in writing as a condition of approval versus the major checklist items, like you said, the updated drainage report or something to that effect?
Again, typically signature is a normal condition of the approval anyways.
Yeah, but I think I've heard, and I'm not sure if my memory serves me right, but I think we go through them all versus putting some down here as like, and putting the major ones up here.
Right, so the checklist does not separate, make any separation in the items, meaning these are high level, like the drainage report, for example, that's an involved item versus a signature. But as John said, we try to use discretion when reviewing the checklist items when it comes to a formal application. And, no, we wouldn't hold up recommendation to accept an application as complete simply based on a signature.
Yep.
That would be a condition of approval, and it typically is in that example.
Yeah. No, I get that. Just saying to focus the conversation that night, if there's a way to put the stuff in writing at the end, the little items versus, these are our three major concerns. But I get your point too, where you're saying, how is staff to distinguish between the two? And what I'm suggesting is maybe you use your own discretion on that and peel them apart.
We could do that, and I think the board can do that as well.
Yeah, because it's really up to the board. I know the usually argument with signature block, you want the owner of that plan to have their signature on it, because otherwise you don't know
Right, so-
who it belongs to or, what. So, when you make accepting or conditionally approving a plan, you want to establish ownership of that.
Yeah, it's just the process typically is an owner sells it to a developer and they don't actually close on it until they get approvals, and that's why the owner doesn't sign off till you get approval here, and they close on the property and they got their money and then they sign off to it. So that's
You want to
the-
know who is the real owner of the plan.
Right,
That
so we
comes
would
from the signature.
in that specific example, staff has typically had that condition of approval. But if there is a different example of a checklist item that staff has put as reason for not recommending completeness and the board feels otherwise, you have the ability to use your discretion as a board.
All right.
Anything else?
Keep on going.
Okay,
No one's falling asleep yet.
so waivers. Again, Londonderry's current process, like I say, we provide the staff memo and we make a recommendation on waivers, as well as completeness in the overall application. When we recommend on waivers, we utilize our professional opinion and expertise and also historically how we've recommended on the specific waiver request. Waivers are also governed by state statute. The statute states that the basis for any waiver granted by the planning board shall be recorded in the minutes of the board. Planning board may only grant a waiver if the board finds by majority vote that, one, strict conformity would pose an unnecessary hardship to the applicant and waiver would not be contrary to the spirit and intent of the regulations. Or, two, specific circumstances relative to the site plan or conditions of the land in such site plan indicate that the waiver will properly carry out the spirit and intent of the regulations. Our site plan regulations essentially say the same language, but I'll read it so that you can hear it verbatim. In the case when the strict application of these regulations, a waiver may be granted. In the case when the strict application of these regulations would result in a peculiar and exceptional practical difficulties or exceptional and undue hardship upon the owner or affected property, or an alternate site planning and building design approach meets the design objectives as stated in the regulations, equally well or better than than compliance with the regulations, and in either of the foregoing circumstances, the waiver may be granted without substantial detriment to the public good. So again, this is information for the board, basically informing you that you have the ability to use your own discretion and authority to act on waiver requests. Staff will still provide a recommendation if that's what the board wants to continue to see. But the key thing, I think, to do going forward, and we will include this in our staff memo, is to make sure that you're citing specific criteria per the state statute when granting a waiver request. That's something that we haven't been doing, but I think that is something we should be doing. So again, that'll be referenced in the staff memos going forward, what that criteria is that you should be referring to when you're granting a waiver.
It's either granting or rejecting. That's, I
Right.
think the rejecting is recent state legislation. It's taken effect already. The other is, Mike Ramsdale wrote a memo for the board, I think, maybe a couple of years ago. That's probably would be good guidance for the board also, that the reasons have to be specific and in writing. And also, it's almost like being the ZBA. Very, very, very similar verbiage.
Okay.
What's that?
Yeah, kind of a good example of that would be that lot line adjustment we had not too long ago, who we ultimately had come back for a second time, that we then, staff did support the waiver on it, but,
The board had its information that it was looking for. about it.
yeah, and I know when we had talked to the first meeting of it, when it was discussed, we were told that there would require a, regrading or reconditioning of the cul-de-sac. That to me is a perfect example of something that would pose an unnecessary hardship to an applicant who's looking for a simple lot line request.
But they had to prove it. That was, they needed, the board needed the proof of it was indeed a hardship, monetary hardship.
Yeah, one of the things.
I guess that's what I'm getting at, is it not enough proof for, when staff says, well, they would have to regrade the cul-de-sac, doesn't constitute enough proof to make a decision that,
Under the new statute, no, it would not.
because
I
there's
think,
not,
I think the
because
board
there's
can
not
use,
a dollar sign associated
the
with it?
board can use its judgment to
Yeah,
get consensus from one another to ultimately take a vote, and if the vote fails, it fails. If it
Yeah.
passes, it passes.
yeah.
But, usually I know in the past, before, the more stringent regulation we have on waivers now, if it's existing use, it's been that way for the last 30 years, the board, we did go against staff on it, so.
And that's a perfect
But the thing
example
is,
of
we
something
need, we need a little more now, current, be statutorily correct. Keep us out of litigation.
that- Yeah, I guess that's just what I'm getting at, statutorily correct is still not staff saying that they would need to regrade the road. That's
Right.
still not enough, at least in
If-
your
if-
opinion. It's certainly enough in my opinion, but in your opinion, that's not enough.
Yes, if
of
we
a-
had like a dollar amount, and we say, that's, that's too costly, why should we make them do that? We have a good reason to, grant the waiver.
Yeah, and Jake, we had a discussion about that particular situation, and I don't believe they provided enough data to support their position. And that was, and I don't think we should be granting waivers if we have incomplete engineering or, just somebody doesn't want to provide the information. I don't think we should go ahead and grant waivers in that situation.
Well, that's one of the key things that Mike Ramsdale had mentioned in the past, especially when it comes to financial hardship. All right, you've got to document, if you're gonna grant that waiver, what the financial, in dollar figures, what that financial hardship is, because we have to justify in writing why we grant the waiver, so.
Right.
Getting back, that was the same thing you were talking about, if you have a dollar figure, like, I think you gave us a dollar figure on that last time, that they agreed to, which was reasonable and stuff like that, so.
You prepared it.
It's important that we have those figures.
Can I just ask a question on that? If you have the dollar figure in hard costs to actually do the construction, but then, to get the number, you may have all these soft costs, which is hiring an attorney, an engineer, and what have you, to come up with that hard cost number. And that might be prohibitive.
Yeah.
Like, that might be $15,000 to get through that process.
That's
Yeah,
what
it'd probably be no different from getting a quote, a company will
I-
readily furnish a quote.
So I do think those are all things that the board needs to consider
yeah.
as a whole, as part of when you're discussing amongst yourselves how you want to proceed with the waiver request.
And I think that,
Having that discussion.
I think that's a good point, and maybe that's the point I'm trying to get across, is, the soft cost side of it is, how much more did it cost that person to, have their engineer get them a price, or,
Yep. And
I don't think you can call Continental and say, hey, how much would it be to regrade my road, and they'll come right out for you and give you a price.
But I think that's, once again, where we use our discretion, and you have to look at the project, the size of the project, who's doing it as an individual homeowner. There's gonna be a certain set of criteria in my mind that I'm gonna expect them to meet compared to somebody doing a 24-building apartment
Oh,
complex,
absolutely,
right?
absolutely.
You
And
know,
that,
doing
that goes,
$15,000 worth of engineering in a $150 million project, go
Right.
do it.
And the
Absolutely.
reason I keep saying it's important to have that discussion, is because that discussion is reflected in the meeting minutes, and if you do grant the waiver, that discussion can be used.
that is
as
your
part of
evidence and your
your
factual
evidence and
basis
justification.
for the unnecessary hardship without needing a
Right, and
legitimate dollar
I
amount.
think another point is, not every board member has to agree.
Yep.
And I know you're aware of it, but I think sometimes that we do forget that not everyone has to agree. You can make a motion and take a vote and get an idea of where the board stands. But I think it's healthy to have these discussions as a board.
Yes, definitely.
All right. Next.
Next.
We've talked about a bulk of this, but this is talking about the approval process. So again, the staff memo with recommendations. What I wanted to focus on more so here is the conditions of approval. that we place in our staff memos. So, as I said before, we compile comments, put them into a memo format. Those comments are the conditions of approval. That process works. The item that I want to focus on, and that's a consistent condition of approval, is when we state as a condition of approval to address all outstanding design review committee comments. So that's just kind of a blanket condition that we keep on these conditions of approval. And it's meant to ensure that we capture any comments from Heritage, for example, from Conservation Commission, for example. At least in my experience here so far, we haven't specifically called out each of those comments, meaning we haven't specifically called out each of the Heritage Commission comments and provided them to the planning board as part of that staff memo, as part of those conditions of approval. And that's something that I think that I would like to do going forward. And the reasoning behind that is because Heritage Commission, Conservation Commission, they're advisory boards to the planning board. The comments they provide are advisory. It's up to the planning board to evaluate and review those comments and use its discretion and its jurisdiction to enforce or not enforce those comments as conditions of approval. So that's something that I'd like to do going forward, is to separate those comments out so that the board has the opportunity to go through them and make its own decision as to whether or not you want to include them as part of the conditions of approval, if that makes sense.
Yes, I know we used to have, all the comments from the Conservation Commission, Heritage Commission, even the police department, fire department and everything, at one time, so that we could go through and look, or,
So that's,
click on the screen. So we have the complete information
Yep.
of what the advisory boards have recommended.
That's pretty reasonable.
yeah, and I think, again, providing the staff memo in advance will help
Yeah.
give the board time to look at those as well. So that's just something
Yes.
that I wanted to add.
Yeah, no, I think makes a lot of sense, and I think it's like, agreeing to, like, an app, and I agree to all the other terms and conditions stated herein, and it's 10 pages long, and it's like, yeah, so I like that idea.
Okay. All right, so in terms of next steps, like I said, I'm not looking for any decisions, if you will, this evening on changes or whatnot. So I think it'd be beneficial to kind of digest the information that we just went through, see how it's applied over the course of the next month, 2 months, whatever amount of time. And then at some point in the near future, we can reconvene in a work session and talk about maybe some potential changes or recommendations the board has, and that staff might have about amendments to the process. But I think it'd be helpful to see this, what we just went over, applied, now that everyone is starting from the same point, if you will, and then kind of go from there. But that's all I had for you.
Yep, because our next meeting, next week, we've got the 4 continued plans. The June 2nd meeting, we've got the lookbook discussion with the Heritage Commission. Maybe July, second meeting in July. We can bring this up, it'll be 2 months. Good time to digest everything. And I think in the meantime, communicate with Kelly and John, send any ideas to them.
And observe what comes before you.
Yes, Johnny?
And in that process too, do you think you give some thoughts to any suggestions you might have in addition to what you've already offered tonight, which were really good, as to further improvements to the process? Or ways to expedite the process, both for you and the consumers that are in front of us?
Yep, so that's something that both John and I talk about often. And, as a result of those conversations, one item is providing the staff memo in advance. So, yeah, I can certainly continue those discussions and figure out if there is additional room for improvement.
Thank you.
There's always room for improvement.
Okay.
Anything else?
What's, I've talked about it before in the past, but, you know, is there a way to, for the planning board, is there a practice that we can go through or something where we can kind of see the process from, you know, we only see the end stages of it. I think for all of us, you know, for me, I've said it a million times, it would be nice to see the process as a whole, or, you know, as a board member, go through the process, or, you know, not be involved in, but see how a design review works, and, you know, see what it's like to be in a design review, and see how these comments are generated, and stuff like that.
Buy a piece of land, come through the process.
Yes, Murphy.
Yeah, that's probably the best way.
So the design review meetings that we've been referencing, that staff has with the applicant, it's technically a public meeting. It's not a public hearing, it's a public meeting. So if a board member wanted to attend that meeting with the understanding that you would not be able to essentially
Have an
be
opinion.
involved in
and-
the conversation or make
Yeah.
comment, because you would automatically need to recuse yourself
You'd
from
have
that
to recuse
application. But
yourself.
you could certainly sit in on the meeting, and I'm happy to inform any interested board members and
You know,
Upcoming-
the other thing would
upcoming
be to
meetings.
just a video a meeting and then let the individual see it, you know, in another location. Because sometimes a board member in there,
Yeah,
and you get the applicant's gonna make it a pitch to the board member, not to staff. So it becomes a distraction.
Pitching to me, I'm just
And then-
watching.
and then the question can be, you know, from that, are you biased? So probably if any member attended one of those meetings, they would have, I would require them to step down.
I think if you
I would have
attend,
to disagree with that, because I would think, if anything, I wouldn't be biased. I would be more informed
So-
than I was
You
at
don't,
the meeting.
we don't know.
well,
That's the
if you're
thing is,
not,
We don't know if you formed an opinion already.
well, anything that's being discussed in the design review discussion is already published on the website in terms of any plans or
Okay.
information.
Correct. Yeah, if you go to
So
projects
that-
under
there would be
review. and you-
no-
It's already there, so
Right.
that takes care of that.
So as long as no one, meaning no board member, is weighing in on providing their opinion or what they
Correct.
may or may
Yeah.
not do at the public hearing, there's no issue. And I should also note that obviously we can't have a quorum at these meetings, so,
Yeah.
but I'm happy to talk with board members individually if there's interest in participating or being present for those design review discussions.
I think it'd be funny to watch you not have, like, comments.
That ain't gonna happen.
You'd have to sit on your hands and your mouth. Said in the lovingest
That was
way
pretty good.
possible.
All right. That's all I have.
Anything else?
I'd like to make a little bit of a comment here, if that's okay. You know, a lot of stuff we talked about is the design review and the consulting engineers and everything. And I think that sometimes, like the last time that we were reviewing one, the engineer didn't do a very good job to begin with. And then when he got his design review, he didn't have enough time to make all the changes that he needed. And I think that an application, a guy's coming in with an application, and he's got a design that he wants to build something. He should, when he puts it through design review, he shouldn't be finding too much wrong with it. And if he can't fill out the application correctly, how good a job is he gonna be doing when he actually builds the structure? I mean, I've worked a lot of big companies. I never had a big-time job, but I did see the result. Badger Company builds distilleries, and they built them very large. They may have design, consulting engineers on 4 or 5 different parts of the project. So I know it's simple for somebody to come in with just a house and a design, but they should be ready.
Thank you.
And that's,
Thank you.
you know, I don't think it should be up to you guys to redesign their whole thing. And certainly they should pay for their design review, because a lot of them, from what I see, have never reviewed it correctly themselves. That's all I have to say. Keep up the good work.
And you're right though, too, Roger. Again, some of them are, just- it's, you know, time is money. And again, charge ahead. I don't care, let's go, you know, I gotta get this done because I gotta close on the property next week and, you know, it's time is, so again,
And
I would never do that as an engineer personally. You know what, I have ethics to follow and I'd say, sorry, I'm not doing it. Then you'd fire John, oh, see you later.
But, I mean, yeah, so for the most part, I think we see good applications, and by the time they get to you, to the board, they're in good shape. But you will always have applications that aren't ready that make it to you because the applicant wanted to move forward for whatever reason. That's something that's always going to exist.
Yeah, I think here you can see some of the struggle between the applicant and the engineer. The engineer is trying to do their job, and they know they're being forced to do certain things. But I mean, the way things are now, finding a good engineer is very difficult. So that's why we're seeing some engineers that are so-so. I mean, they probably will do it, but they, you know when they're telling the truth or not, so. Plus, I mean, most of us have seen enough of them, so we know what's really going on, so.
Motion to adjourn, Mr. Chairman.
Second.
Okay, motion made and seconded, all in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
We're adjourned. Thank you, everyone.
Yes, we're done.